Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. One important announcement. Tomorrow the Hindu newspaper will not hit the stands and as such there won't be any newspaper analysis tomorrow. Now let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with a very important news on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu. Yesterday there was a newspaper report in the Hindu newspaper which said something very scary. What was this development? President of Sri Lanka, Mr. Sirisena, was addressing his cabinet ministers. While addressing his cabinet ministers, he revealed that there is an assassination plot against him. And who is planning this assassination plot? India's external intelligence agency, RAW. And we discussed yesterday that if these allegations are true, or if Sri Lankans consider that these allegations are true, then it is going to seriously impair the relations between India and Sri Lanka. Now we hope the issue is settled. How? The Sri Lankan government has rejected this newspaper report. The President of Sri Lanka has spoken to Prime Minister Modi and has rejected all these allegations mentioned in the Hindu newspaper. So we hope the issue is settled. There is no ill will between the government of India and the government of Sri Lanka, and the ties and close cultural ties that we have with the government of Sri Lanka, with the people of Sri Lanka, they continue. Now let's look at another important issue which is very important for your prelims. We have Ministry of Rural Development. This Ministry of Rural Development under a scheme called Mission Antyodaya Convergence Scheme. What it has done? It has conducted an analysis of more than 3.5 lakh Indian villages. Analysis was done and these 3.5 lakh Indian villages are now ranked. But on what parameters was this analysis done? On what parameters were these 3.5 lakh Indian villages ranked? Parameters like infrastructure, economic development and livelihood, irrigation, health and nutrition, sanitation, women's empowerment, financial inclusion. That means Ministry of Rural Development under a Mission Antyodaya Convergence Scheme, the ministry conducted an analysis of more than 3.5 lakh Indian villages, and on these parameters, these villages were ranked. Whether these villages have infrastructure developed, whether livelihood opportunities are available to the citizens living in these villages, what is the status of irrigation projects, health, nutrition, sanitation, so on and so forth. These parameters you will have to remember because you can expect a potential prelims based question wherein you can be asked on which parameters were these villages ranked by Ministry of Rural Development. And when all these parameters were analyzed, then Kulgod was declared as the best village in India. And this village is in Karnataka, Belagavi district. Now when we look at this village, this newspaper article says that there are some signs of prosperity in this village. This village has a well-equipped Gram Panchayat office. It has branches of nationalized banks. It has a branch of cooperative bank. It has a BSNL center. It has a government primary school. It has 3 private schools. It has an electricity customer care center. It has a public health center, veterinary hospital, ATM, so on and so forth. And these are the signs that tell us that this village is better than any other Indian village in this country. And on this ranking, on these parameters, Kulgod was declared as the best Indian village. There is another important news which talks about that when Ministry of Rural Development conducted this analysis, the villages of Andhra Pradesh are shining in this survey. This newspaper article says that more than third of the Gram Panchayats that are ranked in the top 10 in this survey, they are from Andhra Pradesh. That's what this newspaper article talks about. But at the same time, there are some discrepancies. When we look at this survey and then compare this survey with the surveys released by other ministries, there are some loopholes, there are some mismatches, there are some discrepancies. For example, This survey reveals that more than 95% of Indian villages which have been surveyed, that means these 3.5 lakh villages which have been surveyed, more than 95% of these villages have electricity available for domestic use. But few months ago, the government announced that we have achieved 100% electrification of Indian villages in this country. That means there is this discrepancy. Now, what should we trust? The earlier report of the government or this report revealed by the Ministry of Rural Development? There is another discrepancy. Out of these 3.5 lakh villages which have been surveyed, this survey says that 2 lakh villages have been declared as ODF, open defecation free. But few months earlier, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan released a report wherein it said that out of 6 lakh villages that are there in India, 5.13 are declared as open defecation free. So clearly there is a mismatch in this report when we compare it with the reports of the earlier ministries. But now this survey is significant for one important aspect. When we reveal this information, when we make this information public for every village in this country, then it allows for greater public accountability. People will start asking questions to the government, to the public representatives, that there is a mismatch in what you are claiming and the reality that is there on the ground. So you have to be accountable to the public, and that is what these surveys basically do. They make the government and the public representatives accountable to the people. Now let's look at another important issue which is relevant for your prelims point of view. We have Batukamma. What is Batukamma? Batukamma is basically a floral festival. And this floral festival is celebrated predominantly by the Hindu women in Telangana as well as in some parts of Andhra Pradesh. And this Batukamma floral festival is celebrated every year, which is a very important statement for your prelims point of view. That means Batukamma festival is an annual festival. And this annual festival lasts 9 days. Another factual detail can be relevant for your prelims. This festival starts with Amavas and continues till Durgashtami. This Batukamma festival is followed by another festival. It's called Bodemma festival. And this Bodemma festival marks the ending of Varsha Rutu. Another important statement can be relevant for your prelims examination. But what happens in Batukamma festival? Women, girls, they wear Batukamma saris. And these saris are basically floral saris with beautiful floral markings made on these saris. And now for the first time what has happened? This Batukamma festival is now celebrated at New South Wales Parliament in Sydney, Australia. And that is the significant statement and can be asked in your prelims examination. And these details related to this festival you should know. Now let's look at another issue. India and China are set to resume an armed drill, and this army exercise is called Hand in Hand. This is an annual exercise between Indian Army and the Chinese Army, and this year this exercise will be conducted in China's Chengdu region. Last year this exercise could not be conducted because we saw the Doklam crisis was at its peak, where Chinese forces and Indian forces were eye to eye at the Doklam Plateau or Doklam Tri-Junction. But what you need to understand, it is basically an annual exercise between the armies of India and China. That means no other service is involved. Navy and Air Force is not involved. It's an army exercise hand in hand, and this time it will be conducted in Chengdu region of China. Now let's look at another issue, maybe perhaps asked in the examination. So there is no harm if you will remember this. Anna Burns has won Man Booker Prize, which is the highest and prestigious award which is awarded for fiction writing in the world. And this award, and Miss Burns is the first writer from Northern Ireland to have bagged this award. These details perhaps can be asked sometimes in the examination. Now let's analyze some of the editorials and columns in today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with No Show. And let me give you a brief background of this newspaper editorial. Now we know we have a problem in Jammu and Kashmir, and the problem goes back to 1947 when India and Pakistan emerged as independent sovereign nations. Jammu and Kashmir claimed by both India as well as by Pakistan, and we have fought more than 3 wars on the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now Jammu and Kashmir was slightly peaceful from 1947 onwards, but then in 1989 armed militancy began in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, where people took up arms. They wanted to liberate Jammu and Kashmir from India. Some of them wanted an independent state of Jammu and Kashmir. Some of them wanted Jammu and Kashmir to be merged with Pakistan, although there is a sizable section of the population which believes in India's integrity and believes that Jammu and Kashmir should remain an integral part of India. But from 1989, we saw armed insurgency at its peak in Jammu and Kashmir. Terrorists were trained in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and in other areas of Pakistan, and these terrorists would then infiltrate in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, planning and carrying out terrorist activities against the Indian army, against the politicians, against the local population as well. Slowly and steadily, the terrorism declined. We saw elections in 1996 for the first time after 1989. Because from 1989 to 1996, the state of Jammu and Kashmir was under the president's rule. 1996 saw the elections for the first time in 1990s, and then we saw the democratic process started again. In Jammu and Kashmir, the tenure of the Legislative Assembly is 6 years. Then in 2002, we saw another election, and which many people believe, even the government of India accepted at that point in time, that 2002 was the most free and fair election, because there are allegations that 1989 militancy is because of 1987 elections. These 1987 elections, many people argue, were rigged in favor of the National Conference. There was one political party called MUF, Muslim United Front. They contested the election, but only 4 members of Muslim United Front could win the election. They alleged that these elections were rigged, and some of them then took part in the armed insurgency. One candidate, Muhammad Yusuf Shah, who was a candidate of MUF, he later on joined Pakistan and formed Hizbul Mujahideen. And his name now becomes Sayyid Salahuddin. So Sayyid Salahuddin was basically Muhammad Yusuf Shah in 1987. He tried to contest the election, but according to him and many others, he was declared a loser, and the National Conference candidate was declared as a winner, and that is why he joined militancy. His polling agent was Yasin Malik, who later on became part of Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front. That means many people argue, many activists as well as experts on Jammu and Kashmir, they argue that the militancy of 1989, which erupted in 1989, was primarily because of the rigging of elections in 1987. But then we saw elections in 1996. Some people say even this one was rigged. But in 2002, under Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government, Atal Bihari Vajpayee promised that we will provide Jammu and Kashmir the first ever free and fair election. And most people agreed that 2002 was the first free and fair election in the history of Jammu and Kashmir. Then we saw elections in 2008 as well. Then we saw elections in 2014 as well. But we need to understand that in 2008 there was a huge uprising in Jammu and Kashmir. The government of Jammu and Kashmir had decided to give a piece of land to Jammu and Kashmir Amarnath Shrine Board so that they can provide facilities to the yatris who will go on an Amarnath Yatra. There were huge protests against this move to provide land to Amarnath Shrine Board, and ultimately more than 60-70 people were killed in these protests. But despite these protests, When the elections took place in 2008, we saw more than 60% people participated in these elections. Then came the elections of 2014. But in 2014, prior to 2014, we saw uprising in 2009 as well. We saw uprising in 2010 as well. And despite these two big uprisings in 2009 and 2010, the voting percentage was much better in 2014. That means people were making a distinction between the resolution of political issue of Jammu and Kashmir and the elections. That means they were separating elections from the larger resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir issue, Jammu and Kashmir dispute. And they were looking at elections predominantly from the prism of roti, kapda, makan, bijli, so on and so forth. That means for basic civic amenities, they were going out and casting vote for their representatives. But then something changed. PDP and BJP formed the government, and ultimately we saw deteriorating security situation in Jammu and Kashmir. And we saw in 2016, one very popular militant commander, Burhan Wani, was killed in a police encounter, in an army encounter. Then we saw huge protests in 2016 in Jammu and Kashmir, and these protests are still continuing. And the security situation has deteriorated to such an extent that now the polling percentage is abysmal. There was a Lok Sabha by-election to Srinagar, and the voting percentage was 7%. Then there was a re-poll in some of the polling stations in Srinagar. The voting percentage was 2%. There is an Anantnag Lok Sabha seat right now vacant in Jammu and Kashmir, but the election commission has not been in a position to conduct the election because Anantnag belongs to very volatile South Kashmir. That means the security situation has deteriorated to such an extent that previously the people of Jammu and Kashmir were in a position to differentiate, to distinguish between the resolution of political issue and the elections. They were still coming out and voting in the large numbers, 60-70% voting would take place. But ultimately now we have reached a situation where there were 4 phases of local elections, local body elections, urban elections in Jammu and Kashmir. And the percentage of polling in these elections has been abysmal. There was 4.2% of voting in the 4th phase. And there is extremely low turnout in Kashmir region. Only 6.7% of those eligible to vote voted in the first 3 phases. The editorial says that the poor turnout in the valley for local polls is a wake-up call for the centre. 2 regional political parties, National Conference as well as the PDP, they boycotted the election. Why they boycotted the election? They wanted assurance that Article 35 capital A should not be deleted, should not be repealed. Because it is this Article 35 capital A which provides a special status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And under this Article 35A, no outsider can buy a land in Jammu and Kashmir. No outsider can acquire property in Jammu and Kashmir. No outsider can get a government job in Jammu and Kashmir. No outsider can apply for scholarship in Jammu and Kashmir. It is this Article 35A which provides a special status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. There is a petition pending in the Supreme Court that Article 35A is unconstitutional. These 2 political parties were asking for assurance that Article 35A will not be touched, will not be deleted. Since this assurance did not come, both these political parties, they boycotted the election, and the editorial says, despite this fact that 2 prominent political parties boycotted the election, even then we have seen that the security situation is deteriorating in Jammu and Kashmir. So editorial says that the centre must see that the lack of participation in the polls in the valley is a serious sign of alienation among the people. Editorial says that misguided steps taken to reverse Article 35A, to reverse the special status of Jammu and Kashmir, it might be good for BJP's core constituency, but it is bound to have serious fallout in the valley. These are not my words, these are the statements written in this editorial by the Hindu today. Now let's look at another editorial another outbreak, and it talks about the Zika outbreak in Jaipur. And yesterday we talked about the Zika virus, how it is transmitted, what are the various facts that you should know about Zika virus. And today this editorial goes a step further. What this editorial talks about, that we have to check the mosquito breeding, because it is the Aedes mosquito which is responsible for the transmitting of Zika virus, and we have to somehow control this mosquito breeding. But editorial says that Aedes aegypti mosquito, which transmits the Zika virus, controlling the population, controlling the breeding of this Aedes aegypti mosquito is going to be very, very challenging. That means this mosquito is widely prevalent in India. Yesterday we saw that Zika virus can also spread from pregnant mother to the fetus. And if this pregnant woman is suffering from Zika virus and then the baby is born, it leads to a situation called microcephaly. Microcephaly means small size of the head. That means brain abnormalities can be rampant. What this editorial talks about, that there are 22 women who are pregnant and who have been diagnosed with Zika virus. Since Zika virus can also be transmitted to the fetus, that means we have to have a strong monitoring for all these 22 women who have been diagnosed with the Zika virus. Editorial talks about one more thing. We have something called index case. What is this index case? The first person to be diagnosed with Zika virus, that person is called index case, and we analyze that individual. When we look at this index case and subsequent other cases, that means others who were diagnosed with Zika virus, we have not yet come to a conclusion whether this individual or these individuals, whether they traveled outside or not. That means we don't know whether they contracted the Zika virus outside India or they contracted the Zika virus inside India. That means if we do not have this data, whether this index case and subsequent other cases, whether they traveled outside and contracted Zika virus there or not, that means we can safely assume that this Aedes aegypti mosquito is widely prevalent in India. And what this editorial talks about, that there should be a campaign. We should educate the people living in Jaipur area where the outbreak is huge. We should educate these people that you should avoid having sex, particularly with the intent of getting pregnant, till the outbreak is under control. We have a long winter ahead in North India, and there is an imminent onset of northeast monsoon, which will start coming down. And then ultimately this environment where we have winter in northern India, we have the retrieval of monsoon from northeast India. This provides a conducive atmosphere for mosquito to multiply, to breed and to spread. This calls for a high level of alert. That is what Hindu editorial is talking about. Now let's look at last editorial, last column, unclogging our oceans. Now there is a fact called ghost gear. What is this ghost gear? Fishermen, they use their fishing nets to trap the fishes, to trap the marine ecosystem. But somewhere down the line, these fishing gears, they are abandoned. These fishing gears, they are lost. These fishing gears, they are discarded. And these abandoned, lost and discarded fishing gear is what we call the ghost gear. And this ghost gear is wreaking havoc in our marine ecosystem. It is because of this ghost gear that we have seen olive ridley turtles are dying. We have seen that marine ecosystem is under threat. We have seen whales, dolphins, sharks and even birds are dying because they get trapped in this ghost gear. And that is why we need to tackle and we need to unclog our oceans. What this column talks about, the column says that there is still no data available which could tell us the extent of this ghost gear in India's coast. And in absence of this data, we cannot have a policy mechanism in place. This data is very crucial. And this data is required so that we can have a policy mechanism in place to take care of this ghost gear. Because let's not underestimate the disadvantageous position of these ghost gear. There are ocean currents. What these ocean currents do? These ocean currents carry these ghost gear to different parts of the ocean as well. And then this ghost gear becomes the ghost fisher as well. That makes these ghost gear a potential threat to our ecosystem. And we have seen that these ocean currents, they carry these ghost gear for thousands of kilometers across the ocean. And we have seen that discarded Indian as well as Thai fishing nets have been found as far as in Maldives coast. Because these ocean currents, they carry the discarded ghost gear from India and Thailand to Maldives as well. That means we cannot say that these ghost gears are detrimental to a particular country only, to a particular ecosystem only, because these ocean currents will carry with them these ghost gear and it has a potential threat for other areas as well. But this column also talks about solution. What is the solution? We have an innovative solution to tackle this ghost gear. And what is this innovative solution? For example, in Canada, as well as in Thailand, what fishermen do? They retain their used nets. They recycle their used nets. And ultimately, they use these used nets, discarded nets, abandoned nets to craft socks, as well as for carpet tiles. That is how we can make better use of this ghost gear. In fact, in one instance in India, ghost nets from Kerala, they have been used to pave roads as well. This shows that transformation is possible. And this column says this transformation is possible through more efforts to make the process more organized so that the 7,500 kilometer of India's coast is protected, is safeguarded, and this ghost gear menace is taken care of. That is what this column talks about. It's a beautifully written article and can be a potential mains-based question for your examination. Now let's look at some of the prelims-based questions and mains-based questions. First, prelims. Match the following. Since we are talking about hand in hand, let's look at other military exercises as well. MILEX deals with BIMSTEC, Maitri, Thailand, Lamite 8, Seychelles, hand in hand, China. Let's look at a map-based question. Arrange the following places from south to north. Let's look at the map. First we have Dushanbe, Tashkent, Bishkek, and then Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan. So we have Dushanbe, Tashkent, Bishkek, Astana. That means 4, 1, 2, 3. C is the correct answer. Previous year's question paper, improper handling and storage of cereal grains and oil seeds result in the production of toxins called aflatoxins. 2013 prelims based question, which are these aflatoxins produced by? They are produced by moles or fungi. Let's look at mains based question. The failure to address the problem of manual scavenging is linked not only to ignorance, but also to deeply embedded caste prejudices. We have seen in the recent past how people in Odisha, in Delhi, predominantly Dalits, they have died while cleaning our sewage, while cleaning our garbage, while cleaning our dirt. And this question talks about that you have to answer that this is about ignorance of the law as well as our caste prejudices, that we are not in a position to solve the problem of manual scavenging. Let's look at the answer. A survey conducted by the National Safai Karamcharis Finance and Development Corporation has shown that the number of manual scavengers in India has risen steadily since 2015, despite the fact that we have a ban on this practice since 1993. In fact, we have manual scavengers law, their rehabilitation law, which was passed by the parliament 5 years ago. Their Penal provisions are very stringent, but nobody has been convicted under it so far. It is not difficult to see why. A study on the deaths of 97 victims of manual scavenging across India found that no FIR was lodged in most cases, nor were the bereaved families compensated. Even in the cases in which FIRs were filed, no prosecution was carried out. That means it talks about prejudice, and it talks about the fact that we have ignorance of the law. We are ignorant that this practice is banned since 1993. We have a law which was passed 5 years back. Despite that, we see continuously manual scavenging is on an increase. It is thus reasonable to assume that the failure of the law to address the problem of manual scavenging is linked not only to ignorance, how many people even know that such a law exists, but also to deeply embedded caste prejudices, because we still look at caste in terms of purity and pollution. Since Dalits are impure, they have to be manual scavengers in our society. In a nation fixated upon traditional caste duties and skewed ideas of pollution and purity, the state, its institutions, and even larger society do not notice or care how sewer and septic tank cleaners, almost none of whom is given protective gear and mostly Dalits, work, live and die. Such deliberate attempts to render vast, disenfranchised sections of the population invisible are reflected, for example, in dogged refusal to modernize urban waste management systems. This is both ironic as well as shameful at a time when cacophony around the centre's Swachh Bharat initiative has reached a crescendo in the mainstream political narrative. Apart from an urgent need to devise methods of waste management that protect the laborer's rights to employment and dignity of living, the larger problems of prejudice and caste hatred must be confronted. This is the only way in which the law will work. You can pause the screen, all the three slides of the screen, so that you can take note of and write these answers in your notebook so that you can reproduce them in your examination. That's it for today's newspaper analysis. See you on 20th of October. Thank you. Have a great day.